Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions, and today's opinions will be about Tales of a Vernian Youth by Gaius J. Augustus. So this is another rare read for me, first because it's on my phone, but also because it's a serial! Though this one is a serial that may soon be published in a more traditional book series. I know he's working on that at the moment. But Tales of a Vernian Youth is a story about a young man named Octavian, who is a graduate student at the National University of Magic. He is having a very bad day. First, his advisor refuses to accept his course of study because he's focusing on both a masculine and a feminine discipline, which is considered wildly inappropriate. Then his research advisor, named Teacher, makes him work all night to finish their project, which is building a magically powered, insanely advanced mechanical doll. A fancy robot. And then Teacher sends both Octavian and the robot replica into a parallel world, and with nary a word of explanation. Now Octavian has to figure out where he is, if they actually are in a different world, and how to get home. All with the help of Replica, who is insanely advanced, has a full personality matrix, but doesn't seem to remember what she is. First, they're going to have to deal with the irrationality of a world powered on not the logical option of magic, but instead, steam-based technology. The horror. Okay, so first, yes, this is a serial, meaning it is being released in small episodes that are meant to be read sort of individually, but as part of a much bigger whole. And so far, I've read the first two novellas? Episodes? Books? They are broken into chapters within each segment, so my inclination is to say novella or book, but these are not really meant to be read as, like, a standalone in isolation. They are definitely meant to be read as part of a greater whole. And the first two episodes are only the beginning of a much longer work. Now, because of this, do expect there to be elements of this review that feel incomplete, because I have not read the entire thing. And each episode will have something of the shape of a traditional story, but you ain't gonna get that feeling of completeness at the end of each one that you would with a more traditional book. But that's not the point. This is like a TV show, not like a movie. But I wasn't going to be able to get through all that has been written as of yet in the week that I'd given myself to read, so I just read the first two. But I'm really liking where this is going so far. I love the characters. Octavian is very quickly established as this little ball of anxiety and determination. He has strong opinions, is distractible and obsessive, and I love him, he's great. Replica is a bit of a weird character because she is both unknown to all other characters and really to herself as well. She is literally just coming to life at the beginning of episode 2, and that makes her something of a blank slate. Octavian is the only one who knows her at all, knows even what she is, and he knows she was programmed with a personality, but he has no idea what this personality is going to look like. And she wakes up having to figure out how to speak, how to stand, how to walk. There's something very childlike about her, helped along by the fact that Teacher put her in this super childlike dress, but there's also a steel to her, a straightforwardness, a surety that feels very mature in its own way. And she's not really naive, she is very curious, and she's sometimes ignorant, but she's not one of those people that just automatically trusts everything the way we tend to associate with small children. She doesn't feel like a child, she just feels shiny and new. Teacher is the other main character, even though he's not in a good portion of what I've read so far, and I suspect he will not reappear for quite a while, if ever. But his presence is everywhere, because he's the one who designed Replica, he's the one who sent them here, he's the one who has been guiding Octavian to be who he is for the last couple of years, and they are both following his breadcrumbs. He's like a hole in the matrix of this story that they are working around. And I love the way information about his relationship to Octavian and all of this is just casually dropped into the story so that it feels very natural. And so many of the things that are mentioned and make sense in retrospect, and they're mentioned in retrospect, like, oh yeah, Teacher made me study this. I wonder why. And like, it's one of those things that, like, looking back, you could see, like, Octavian being like, yeah, I understand why he forced this now, this makes sense. But I also totally understand why Octavian was not suspicious at the time that his teacher was telling him to study this. So I really love the fact that there is this major third character who exists almost more as a lack than as an actual character, but he is shaping the story entirely. I also really love the world building here. We get a surprisingly large amount of world building on the world our main characters will be leaving. And I personally think that can be super important for Portal fantasy, even though it's science fantasy, but same thing, Portal stories. We need that background to understand who our leads are and why they react the way they do when they find themselves on a new world. And the world of origin is actually really cool here. There's enough history and familiarity that I assume that this is sort of a future version of our world, and I really love how it's developed its differences from our current world. Like, we get enough history that we can sort of see where things start to diverge, where things go a different path. And I love how academic the setting is, especially in the beginning. Like, there are moments reading this that I felt like I was right back in college, and like I was talking to my advisors and looking at the grandeur like abutted right against the decay of like, oh, we don't have funding to rebuild this. The pretension of it all, and the desperate desire to prove yourself in a system that feels as rigid as a brick. It was all really great and really evocative. And then the world we step into gets a huge amount of world building as well. And this is where I noticed an interesting quirk. This book is in an omniscient POV that often zooms into focus on one character or another, but also zooms back out. And that means that as readers, we often know things that the characters don't know and may never know. And we get to learn far more about the world we jump into than these characters have learned by the end of book 2, and that I suspect they may ever know about this world. And I really like that. It feels more old school to me. Like, it reminds me of the older adventure stories, the adventure books from the 1800s and the 1900s, early 1900s. And I honestly really like a limited third person where you focus in on one character and you're mostly seeing what they are seeing, knowing what they are knowing, etc. But it's sort of become ubiquitous that if you're in third person, it's usually limited, and that can be limiting. And I feel like the fact that limited third person and first person perspective has become the norm can really cut down on some really interesting ways of telling a story. So I'm happy to see something that is doing something a little bit more different with the POV, something that used to be very, very common and has sort of fallen by the wayside. But also, I just love steampunk worlds, so it's very nice to see a steampunk world, and I feel like this one is a very well thought out steampunk. Like, what we're seeing makes sense, and it's funny, and it's fun, and it's really, really one of those things that I will always gravitate towards in books. Like, show me steampunk, I love it. And the hilarious thing is Octavian clearly hates it. He hates the illogicality of the steam technology. And its ridiculousness is a large portion of what I like and what drives Octavian crazy. And I'm all for this. It makes it super fun. And the book commits to the fact that it is illogical. Carrying around enough water to power things by steam just is too much weight. It takes up too much space. And there's some wonderfully hilarious bits of world building focusing on the illogicality of steam technology. And that's one of the things I love about Portal stories. When you have characters going from one world to another, you have the built-in outside perspective that can point out the ridiculousness of the way things work. And yeah, we are mostly seeing the silly side of pointing out that ridiculous outsider perspective, but I suspect it will be used to point out some more serious, like, flaws and ridiculousnesses later on, but that's just me guessing, because like I said, I've only read 2 chapters of this. Or 2 books? 2 episodes? And I love the fact that the world building for their origin world does not actually stop once we step into another world. We still get bits of history, tangents about technology, introductions to concepts, and I love the tangential nature of so much of this world building. There are these little stories within the story that are there for no purpose except for humor and building the culture and the setting of the world. And it reminds me very much of Terry Pratchett, and hear me out on this, Moby Dick. Both have these little tangential moments that we just stop the narrative to explain something that objectively we didn't really necessarily need for the plot, but it builds so much more depth to the world, and, at least in Terry Pratchett, it's fucking funny. Same in this book. It is used perfectly to give us little bits of theme, character, and world building, and my ADHD little heart loves this stuff. And this is one of those things that I would love to see more of in, like, writing as well. Like, I love those silly little tangential moments. And I love the way they're used here to break tension and to build humor. Like, there are a couple of different times within the first two segments that there's something really dramatic happening. There's a big discovery going on. There's, like, a fight about to happen. And we get these moments of, like, oh my god, how will the characters survive? Cut, random tangential history. And it is used so perfectly to subvert expectations and to play on tension, which is, at its core, what humor does. And on that note, these moments are funny because this book is fucking funny. We've got a very satirical tone, funny names, straight up jokes, and I really did, like, actively laugh out loud a couple of times, which I honestly don't commonly do when reading. And yeah, there were a couple of jokes that did not land for me, but overall, I think it did a great job of balancing the humor and the drama. The jokes come at the right moment so the story can keep progressing, so that we can keep caring about the characters without the tension being broken at the wrong moments. And I really like how the plot is progressing here. I feel like it's a very oddly shaped plot, which is part of the nature of reading a serial. Things are going to not fit the traditional shape of a book because it's not meant to. We're getting a huge amount of description, beautifully unusual settings, deep explorations of concepts that we may never see again. There's just a lot of world building and less focus on, you know, extreme advancement of the plot. And the leads are not always making the most logical choices, and I love that. I feel like it's really leaning into the author's strengths here. The action we have is well described, interesting, and fun. There's definitely enough of a climax at the end of section 2 that I definitely felt fulfilled. Like, I felt like I had read a climax, though it is a bit less so for episode 1. I will get to that a little bit later. But also, Replica's nature as being brand new to everything, but also smart and savvy in her own way, drags Octavian into an almost casual approach to dealing with some things that would likely be less than casual. And the exact opposite of that is Octavian's panic responses often pull what should be, honestly, relatively calm moments into a sudden jolt of action or a sudden jolt of random plot advancement. And I really like the way this keeps you on your toes, and because it's not having to keep the traditional arc of a, you know, more normal book, we get to do these weird plot excursions. We get to do random plot cul-de-sacs that are just fun. Now, I mentioned that the first episode / book / novella is just a little bit less climaxy ending, and yeah, it sort of just ends. There is a really dramatic moment, but it's only like halfway through the book, and the rest is pretty slow, exploratory, let's discover each other, let's discover where we are. It's exploration, and that's fine in a serial, especially one where the first episode is free, so you can get the first episode and the second episode for very cheap, but it just means that the first episode is a bit slow of a start. I also feel that the humor hadn't really fully found its feet in book 1, which is fair. We as readers are still just discovering the voice, and so you're feeling out what's meant to be funny, what we need to focus on, what is going to be more serious and continuing the plot forward. And it feels a bit like a pilot of a TV show. You know, the way they often spend a huge amount of time introducing you to things that may end up being entirely cut from the rest of the series. Like, we spend a lot of time getting to know Octavian's advisor, and it's fun. It's really good character building. He's a really amusing character. His interactions also tell us a lot about Octavian and a lot about the world, but he never reappears in any of what I've read, and I get the vibes he's not likely to be coming back much at all in the long run, ever. And I admit, I was a bit confused at first why Octavian basically had two different advisors. Now, eventually it became very clear that, like, okay, one is an academic advisor and one is a professor he's assisting on a project. But I suspect a lot of readers will be a little bit confused if they don't have a huge amount of experience in academia. But also, there's just a lot of introduction in the first book, which makes sense. There's going to be. And it's pretty usual for a book, but when you read that alone as a standalone piece, it does have a feeling of, okay, and you need to get to the second segment to really have the plot pull you forward and go, okay, yeah, now I'm invested, I know what's going on, I'm interested, I want to see more. And, like, I still definitely want to read the third segment. Like, I was tempted to go ahead and buy the third segment and read it for this review as well. Not just because segment 2 definitely ends on a cliffhanger, but I still felt like it felt more like I'd finished a book having read chapter 2 or segment 2 than just having read the first one. Like, I actually planned on reading just the first part and doing a review for it this week and doing each one separately whenever I got to them, mainly because I have a lot of trouble focusing on ebooks, and there's something about having my phone in my hand that just wakes up every ADHD tendency in my body. Like, it is so hard for me to be just sitting there reading, and then suddenly I'm on Facebook, and I'm like, why am I here? I don't even like Facebook. And, like, the little progress bar that you get at the bottom with the percentage numbers, it doesn't feel the same as, like, flipping ahead to see how many pages are left in the book, / like, looking at how much of a chunk there is, and that looking at it gives me that feeling of accomplishment that keeps me focused, keeps the dopamine running, that keeps me saying, yes, I am reading right now. And, like, I even miss the physical fidget possibilities of books. Like, I can't fan the pages of this. I can't rub my fingers along the spine. I can't rub my fingers up and down the cover to get the different textures of, like, embossed versus not. And all these things allow me to focus better when I'm reading. And also there's a problem of I've spent so much time of my life that when I'm looking at a page on the screen, that means I'm editing. So quite often when I'm trying to read something like an ebook, my brain is trying to switch into editing mode and I'm trying to be like, oh, I need to make a note of this. I'm like, no, you don't, you're just reading. And so I just don't fall into the story the way I do e-reading. Like, I don't fall into a story reading ebooks the way I do a physical book. And the fact that I was able to fall into the story on my phone really says a lot about it. But the reason I mention all this is I know this about myself, and so when I decided that I was going to read this serial, my plan was, because I know it's only available on ebook, I planned on only reading one segment a week because I just know I'm going to have trouble focusing. And even though, yeah, each segment's only about 100 pages, I just wasn't sure I'd be able to get through more than that. And then I finished segment 1 and I was like, this is unfair to review on its own because this is really like the opening chapters. And also, I had plenty of time. And segment 2 I got through so quickly. Like, oh my god, it dragged me right in. Like, I'd say the first segment took me probably 2-ish nights to get through. And the second segment, I sat there and read in about 3 hours. It was 2 segments of, like, 2 sittings of reading, and neither of them I got super distracted in. So it did a really good job of pulling me in. But why I bring this up is because, yes, at the end of segment 1, all my feelings is I'm interested, but I don't think I can fairly judge this. Whereas in the end of book 2, I feel like I've read a book. Overall, I'm really liking where this is going. I love the fact that we have a super casual exploration of gender with characters who are trans and non-binary without it being a big deal. They just exist and the world accepts them and it's not like drama. But we also have a little bit more of a serious exploration of how society interacts with gender norms, with the gender disciplines in magic and the acknowledgement that it is pretty damn arbitrary, but it's still seen as innately taboo to break this line. That is a really interesting exploration that I can't wait to see more of. I love the relationship that is developing between Octavian and Replica, and I really like the fact that for once we do have one of those moments of like, oh, there's something that doesn't get addressed for too long and it could be this big thing, and there's a reason it doesn't get addressed for so long. Like, shit is happening too fast by the time that Octavian realizes Replica doesn't know this thing. But when it is addressed, it isn't this overly dramatic moment. It's just a sweet little character building moment, and I love that, because that's a trope that I find overused. I think the prose fits the story perfectly, though I will admit there were a few sentences I had to reread because I felt like they were trying to fit too much into the sentence for my comprehension, but that honestly might have been a side effect of the fact I was reading on my phone, and as mentioned, I struggle to focus when reading on my phone. But overall, I'm really enjoying this, and I definitely will be reading segment 3 and on into however long it lasts, though I am secretly hoping that he'll get an agent and get a full print version out of the first 4 books before I move on to reading segment 3 so that I can read it in a print copy. But either way, I'm going to read as much of Tales of Vernian Youth as we end up getting.